Good evening, Toronto. My name is Miranda Hyatt Orne, and today I'm going to blow your minds. Thank you. So, there's this thing over here, and I call it the cycle of perception. I've been working on this theory for years. I could even say my whole life, but I wouldn't go that far. So, today is the day that this cycle leaves my brain like a bird and flies into all of yours. And I'm so excited that you're here with me to have that happen. Okay, so it's time to decode the cycle. The first thing that I need to say is there's a little mishap, and the identification section and development section are meant to be switched, but no biggie. Okay, so we start with neurology. This is kind of what we're born with. It's the first senses that we're introduced to. It's the first experiences that we have. It's sometimes the physical makeups of our brain, but most importantly, it's the first experiences that we have with senses. And it teaches us how to perceive things as good and bad, and it teaches us how to love. Our neurology then influences our initial traits, is what I call them. And these are something that everyone has, and they develop and change through our whole lives, and everyone interacts with them differently depending on their environment, which is like your neurology. Okay, so with these initial traits, at their base, there are survival methods. And survival not only in the sense of physicality, but also your emotional survival. You have certain sounds that you make as an infant that get your parent to give you what you need, or your caregiver. And we have things that teach us that they are important or not important. Our initial traits tell us this is something that is important and that I need to hang on to, and this is something that I can let go of. So it's how we categorize experiences as good or bad, or important or disposable. And then the development. We're going to pretend it's a development. As the variable of time touches these initial traits, they deepen. And as we go through the process of having experiences and categorizing them as important or disposable or whatever that may be, they change the way that we think about our identity. And I think through development, physically and emotionally, people become human and people become individual. And at this time, the integration of whether you see yourself as permanent or malleable happens. And whether you think of yourself as permanent or malleable is dependent on your initial traits, which are influenced by your environment. And once you have that idea in your head, you move forward in your life and you're having these other experiences, you're categorizing them in the way that you do. And you get to a point where you can either stay in the unconscious cycle of, or rotation of this cycle, or you can begin to grasp hold and grasp understanding of the way that it's moving. What I'm going to kind of zone in on now is what we do as artists to take control of this cycle. Artists are those who have the initial trait that says, go deeper. They've had an experience that teaches them that diving into who they are is a positive thing and will get them further. They have the initial trait that tells them that they are malleable and capable of change. Okay, so that happens. You're an artist. and you're learning to understand yourself. And This is where you start to identify, we're pretending it says identify again. We start to identify who we are and where these initial traits came from. A lot of us tonight, a lot of the speakers have been talking about this heritage project, which is definitely something that I was thinking about a lot in this, and I think we all think about. It's where we come from, and it's the people before us that teach us how to live and how to be. And identifying those things is something that I think a lot of people try and do. But what artists do is we break it down in a way that we can learn to absorb the information and spit it back out with a different perspective over what it means. As we are dissecting the way that we are and the initial traits that we have found to influence us greatly, we gain control over the understanding that the capacity to change comes from the will to change. And what is a will? It's an initial trait. It's that thing in your head that says, this is something I want to do, this is something that will get me further, which is a positive thing or a negative thing. And if you have the will to change, that's when you're moving through this dissection part. I think a lot of people in the world go through this cycle without being conscious of their initial traits or where they come from. And the only point you can access the manipulation segment of the cycle is when you have the will to dissect where your initial traits come from. Artists are those who dissect these things and understand them in a way that we can spit them back out and understand them in a new way, like I said. And that's where the manipulation comes in. The core of manipulation comes from consciousness equaling control. When you're going far back into the reasoning behind why you are acting or reacting to something in a certain way, you start to understand more about yourself, and you're able to create space between an initial instinctive reaction you have and the reaction that you want to have after you have that initial kind of feeling. And like a habit, once you've brought this specific thing back into your conscious, and you do it enough times, you create that space enough times, it becomes something that you don't have to put as much effort into, which gives you more room to gain more control over the rest of your conscious. So us as artists today, speaking to you, are utilizing the vulnerability of internal understanding and sharing it with the external environment, which is you guys. And by learning to do that, we're not only controlling the way that we understand ourselves, but also manipulating the way that we understand you and the way that you understand us. The last part of this is the way that the manipulation connects to your neurology. Some of you may get it already. However, once we get there, if you have kids mayhaps, or little people around you or something like that, and you've put in the work to understand yourself, or you've put in the work to manage your feelings in like a healthy way, you're then programming these people with these new understandings, which gives them more space and more opportunity to use that initial trait you have influenced them to have and be capable of developing it, identifying it, dissecting it, and manipulating it. Thank you so much for being here. Good night.